Welcome, this is Raphael.
And Catalina.
You are now about to take your next step in the serenity centering journey. Welcome. We have a new quote to discuss, and I'm excited. Here we go. Here is the quote. God is not a terrorist. And I must laugh because when I kept talking to Catalina about doing this podcast, I would say, do you want to do the God is a terrorist podcast? She's like, God is not a terrorist. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, exactly. Which makes me laugh. But she's right. It's very important to say God is not a terrorist. That is the quote. And Catalina, you want to kick us off with some thoughts about that?
Yeah, so this is from an Al-Anon book from a 12-step program, Al-Anon, and it's called Courage to Change. And there's a whole meditation on this from that book. Mm-hmm. But one of the lines from it is that God is not a terrorist. And it just struck me really profoundly one day when I read it, because I just sat there for a second and I really thought about, like, what is a terrorist? What actually did someone who inspires fear, someone who creates chaos, someone who makes you feel little, makes you feel insignificant, someone who has absolutely zero interest in what you want or whether you're happy or not, seeks destruction to do whatever it wants to accomplish. Like, what is, thinking really in my mind, like, what is a terrorist? And then thinking about how in some areas of my life, I kind of act like God's a terrorist. I kind of act like God is somebody who inspires fear and somebody who's, any of those traits that I picked out. And it was really cool and kind of funny and ironic and silly that it was calling out specifically, God is not a terrorist. God is not trying to make your life hard. He's not trying to make your life scary. He's not trying to make you feel afraid. He's not trying to make you feel insignificant. He's not trying to make you feel not cared for or replaceable, all those things. And so anyways, that's what really struck me about it, is really remembering, like, well, what is God, And I know we've mentioned this in previous podcasts, but I just love going back to, what is it? Corinthians 13.
First Corinthians
13, where it says love is patient, love is kind, and what is God? Well, God is love. And so you could technically substitute God for all of those different pieces. And that's what God is, which is literally the opposite of a terrorist. So anyways, that's kind of what popped in my brain and why I liked this quote so much, because it was, I don't know, it kind of made me laugh at myself.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff, Catalina. It's a beautiful quote. And it's funny because you almost want to dismiss it fast, right? Like, there was a part of me that could have been like, God is not a terrorist. Let's just end it right there. So now that you know. What's funny about it is because even though I can know that subconsciously, as you said so eloquently, a lot of the times there are some things where I behave almost as if he were a terrorist or this controlling person with rules and all this weird stuff. So I think it's cool to kind of examine our experience of a higher power and to re-examine, how's that working for us? I remember one time someone said to me, I was telling him something and I can't even remember what the heck it was, but I was saying something and I'm like, yeah, and God would be disappointed. And he's like, I'd fire that God. I'd fire that God. If that's really the God, I'd fire that God. And it's like, wow, getting permission to fire God. Not that you'd really ever fire God. What that's saying is, firing that crazy belief you have in God, because it's not real. It's not in line with reality. And I love this idea that I've heard about writing a want ad or for God. Like, if I could make God a date, if I wanted to date God, what kind of God would I want? And think about the attributes I would want in that mate who's really God, and I think it's important for me. Through my experience, I can learn that, for me, at least, I believe God is love, unconditional love for every human being. And, not a codependent, not an authority, not a authoritarian, not a terrorist, but patient, some of those attributes, kind, compassionate, encouraging, affirming, a good friend, a lover, tender, wants to help as much as I ask for and open to that help, will never force anything on me, wants to be sought freely, wants to be invited in freely. And that's the beautiful thing that, I find out about God in my experience. And, that's given me a lot of peace, but it wasn't always that way. And I think because we're kids, right, Catalina, we have different authority figures who in our lives, whether it's our parents, older siblings, coaches, teachers, things we see on TV, different experiences. We associate some of their attributes, I believe, with who God is. And it, a lot of times has nothing to do with who really God is, but we associate these things. And I know I did. They just were faulty. I mean, where did you get some of your crazy beliefs around God?
Yeah, I think it's...
That weren't accurate, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's experience. I think it's maybe belief systems that I had weird thinking about, that I came to odd conclusions. And, it's funny because sometimes I've read books that are spiritual in nature. And years ago, I would read them and I would pick out like the sickest parts of those books. And I would pick out the... I would interpret those things as intense as possible. Like it was so hot and cold. It was so, I don't know, just over the top, with perfectionism and things like that. And then I thought it was, for a while, I blamed those things, those books, those authors, right, those priests, those preachers, those whatever. And, later in life, I read some of that same stuff. Like some of those same books, I reread them just out of curiosity. And it's so funny because my spirituality has changed. And so I actually wound up seeing that there was a lot of really beautiful things in that book. But I looked past it. I looked for the sickness because that's where my mind was at. I looked for the, overly intense. And then I interpreted it. So but yeah, from life experiences, and it's probably the best answer.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. So yeah, 1 Corinthians 13, so beautiful, such a beautiful indicator of what God is. At least for me, it fits, patient, kind, does not envy, does not boast. And really it talks about love, right? So this talks about 1 Corinthians talks about love, but you also find in scripture in 1 John 4 and other places as well, that God is love. So you can substitute love and God the same for this. At least for me, I do that. Love is patient, it is kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, does not dishonor others, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered, does not insist on its own way, does not keep track of wrongs, always believes, always hopes, always trusts. Love never ends. And, the greatest of these things, faith, hope, and love, is love. So love is very important for me. And so, yeah, I think it's very important. And knowing my higher power as this loving presence, and it's one thing, like I'm telling you, and if someone could tell me what I'm listening to, but experiencing it myself. And, how that's helped me is to ask this higher power, like, hey, if you really exist and your love, I want to experience that. Show me what I can do to help me experience you as a loving presence and as someone who really does help. And that's been a really cool dance that I haven't mastered yet, but I'm in the process of continuing to learn more about. And the more I have a better understanding and acceptance of myself and a better understanding of this higher power, the more freedom and joy and happiness I found, imperfectly, of course, but, definitely progressively, which is beautiful to me. Catalina?
Yeah, that's about all I've got.
That's all you got, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. We'll look forward to the next quote that we break down. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking another step in the serenity centering journey. As always, take what you like and leave the rest. Until the next episode, make sure you enjoy each step of the journey. Peace.